For the last 4 weeks, we have been studying the book of the prophet Habakkuk in the Old Testament. Habakkuk was the end of the 7th century BC and in the kingdom of Judah, and wrote his book probably sometime between 610 and 605 BC. The Assyrian Empire, which had conquered the northern kingdom of Israel some 100 years previously, had been declining, and the Babylonians were the growing power. The ruins of Babylon seen today, about 55 miles south of Baghdad, the capital of modern Iraq. The kingdom of Israel had fallen to the Assyrians because of their unfaithfulness to God, and their population had been deported and scattered throughout the Assyrian Empire, never to return. But things in Judah were little better. There was bribery and corruption, the rich exploited the poor, and there was violence and injustice throughout the nation. He cries out to God and asks him why he doesn't do it. God replies that he is going to bring the Babylonians to punish Judah. Habakkuk, he protests that the Babylonians are evil than the people of Judah. God, so how can he do this? Habakkuk doesn't think it's possible, so he decides to wait. God responds to his complaint. God replies that in due time he will punish the Babylonians. But in the meantime, those who are righteous must carry on faith and obedience to him. Then God tells Habakkuk in detail what he will do to the Babylonians. This we have in our passage for today. I'm going to Habakkuk chapter 2 and verses 6 to 20. Will not all of them taunt him and scorn, saying, "Woe, piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Visitors suddenly arise. Will they make you tremble? Then you will become their prey. You have plundered many nations. The people will plunder you, for you have blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house again, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many people, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire? Exhaust themselves for nothing. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. To him who gives drink to his neighbors, the wineskin until they are drunk, so on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink, nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming round to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon, and your destruction of animals will cover you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed cities and everyone in them. Of what value is an idol carved by or an image that teaches lies. For the one who makes in his own creation, he makes idols weak. Woe to him who says, "Come to life," or to a lifeless stone, "Wake up." Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and there is no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent. Here we have a series of 5 judgments with which God will punish the Babylonians for the injustices they perpetrated, conquered to build their empire. In the first woe, the Babylonian is compared to a thieving moneylender. He steals from some, from others he takes value and pledge for tiny loans, thus making himself wealthy by exploiting the needy. Sooner or later, the oppressed will rebel. The plundered nations will turn to the Babylonians. All tyranny has within it the seeds of its own. Cities in them were exposed to unrestrained massacre after a siege. For such atrocities, retribution will be exacted. Human life, precious in God's sight, wanton bloodshed is an offense to him. In the second woe, the exploiter knows that the world is his enemies, and he seeks protection by making his capital city and his palace impregnable. This he would do by the forced labor of subject peoples and the profit from unjust gain. God compares an empire founded on violence, plunder, and exploitation to a Jericho. It is bound to collapse. The walls and the beams are in perpetual tension instead of providing mutual support. The glory of Babylon would be human. In 539 BC, Babylon was conquered by the king of the Persians, and his army. In the third woe, the Babylonians were attempting to construct an empire to cover the known world, for which they used brutality and forced labor. They built, they undermined their own construction. Their empire would come to an end. By contrast, the kingdom of God has no end. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This is a wonderful promise. In the fourth woe, God uses a drunken orgy to describe how a conqueror hates those who he has conquered, to rob them of their self-respect and destroy them. But as the conqueror, he will be treated himself. Babylon will have its own nakedness exposed and be covered with shame. The wanton use of violence against nature will return to haunt the perpetrator. This is part of the world's moral order as God has created it. And we have seen it time and again throughout history and in our own times. The fifth woe exposes the folly of idolatry. How absurd it is for people to accord divine status to dumb idols that they themselves created and then expect help from them. Idolatry is essentially the worship we make rather than our maker. In our day, that could include possession, home, career, sport, etc. We worship when they become the focal point of our lives. Live. So Habakkuk's argument by saying that the good will survive and the bad will suffer. God is not blind to what is going on, nor unjust. He is the living God, in contrast to the deaf, lifeless idols fashioned by human. He is the God of the whole earth, the whole universe, and all people must worship him. He received the answer he needed from God. He had asked God how he could allow a violent heathen people like the Babylonians to punish the people of Judah for their sins. God hoped the Babylonians would receive their punishment. The title we have been in this section of Habakkuk's book is God's Judgement. How does this apply to us today? One thing we can say is that judgment is coming. We may have to wait for it. We may not see it in our lifetime. In Habakkuk's day, the Babylonians came and punished Judah. They laid siege to Jerusalem, destroyed the city and the temple, collected groups of people to Babylon. That was in BC. The Babylonians, in turn, were defeated by the Medes and the Persians under Cyrus the Great in 539 BC. Then the Persian Empire fell to the Great of Macedonia and Greece in 31 BC. Skipping forward a few hundred years, the Romans conquered Judea in 63 BC. The Roman Empire covered most of Europe, including Britain. All empires commit atrocities to subject peoples under their rule. There is no exception to this. Years ago, while I was in Togo, I read a book about what the British did in Kenya. Horrified and ashamed. Britain was heavily involved in the deportation of Africans. And at the recent Commonwealth Summit in Samoa, representatives called on Britain to apologize for their trade and to make reparation. I think we should do so. But our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, declined, saying we are not responsible for what others did. They say it is not inherited. I would dispute that. What we have, what we are today, much from what we inherited from our ancestors. This is not only true for us, but for all the other European countries who had colonies. France, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal. Germany lost after the First World War. I was born just as the Second War was starting. My father was in the Royal Air Force, and my mother and I were parents in Surrey. It was supposed to be safer than here in Barnet. Bombing all over the country, and especially in London. I remember the air raid sirens. Go and hide in a metal shelter, which my grandparents had in their lounge, and sounded. Well, at the other end of the cul-de-sac where we were living, blast knocked out all the windows in the house. I remember going upstairs through the ceiling of my grandparents' bedroom. The house was unlivable, so we went to my great-uncle who lived in Coventry. But in the end, the Germans did more than we did. Germany, whereas in my school, there were only 2 girls who lost their fathers in the war. In 1966, when I was doing a linguistics course as part of my training with Wycliffe Bible translators. A couple of German students there who said that when they were at school, 75 children in their class had lost their fathers. Back in the 1980s, we had a German lady in our church who came to us through Finn. She described her experiences immediately after the end of the war, when she would go out every morning to look for breakfast for her elderly parents. Then the British soldiers were the baddies. I remember a German Wycliffe colleague described how she escaped the Russian soldiers as they captured Berlin and were raping all the women. She said that as she, the Holy Spirit guided her, saying, "Left here, where atrocities are committed, are no better than others." Sometimes we don't. Now, in the current wars in the Middle East and elsewhere, at the present time, Russia is trying to empire by attacking Ukraine. I've only given a few examples. I haven't mentioned China or Japan or the world. Happen all the time, not just during wars. We hear about them in the news and see them on TV. Justice. When bad things happen, we want someone to be held accountable and to be punished. And we want the punishment. It is innate in all of us. Who has not heard a child cry, "It's not fair"? We've probably said it ourselves. A recent example of injustice is how the former owner of Harrods, raped and sexually abused many women over many years, and because of his was never called to account for it. Because he is now dead, he cannot be tried and punished by a human court. But he will answer to God at the final judgment. Then he will get what he deserves. The subject of God's judgment is profound and important, and one which is little talked about or even preached about in churches today. Maybe it is a reaction to people in the past who marched with placards saying, "Prepare to meet thy God," and the subject of judgment being overdone in evangelistic services. Or, what is more likely, that people have excluded God from their thinking in our secular and atheistic culture. I can really only give a brief outline of what the Bible teaches about judgment here. There is a lot in the teaching of Jesus, for example. The parable of the weeds and the parable of the wedding banquet, 10 virgins, and the parable of the sheep and the goats. And final judgment will come at the second. Christ himself. All people will be judged. Even the angels will come under judgment. Every aspect of life will come under scrutiny, including every careless word. The judgment will not be confined to unbelievers. Christians will be judged too. Corinthians. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due to us for the things done in life, whether good or bad. We will be judged according to our stewardship, talents, gifts, opportunities, and responsibilities given to us during the course of our lives. I will conclude by reading some verses from 1 Peter and from 1 John. 1 Peter, chapter 1, verses 13 to 21. Therefore, that are alert and fully sober, your hope on the grace to be brought to you as Christ is revealed at his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived. For just as he who has holy, so be holy in all you do. For be holy, because I am holy. Since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, I am as foreigners here in reverent fear. For you know that it was not with perishable, such as silver or gold, that you from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors. The blood of Christ, a lamb without defect. He was before the creation, but was revealed in these last times. Through him you, God, who raised him from the dead and glorified, so that your faith and hope are in God. And from 1 John chapter 4, at verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been and knows God. Who love does not know God, because God is love. God showed his love among us. He has sent his one and only Son into the world. Live through him. This is love, not that God, but that he loved us, his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, is made complete in us. How we know that we live in him and he in us. He has given us of his Spirit, and we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the world. It acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God. God lives in them, God. And so we know on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. Our love is made complete among us. We will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus.